Mara walked through the empty streets of downtown, her footsteps echoing off glass towers and silent storefronts. The once bustling city had grown eerily quiet in recent years. With the rise of remote work and virtual living, most people had retreated into their homes, leaving urban centers hollow. The government's solution had been HoloLife, a system of holographic population fillers designed to keep cities looking alive. From a distance, they were convincing. HoloLife holograms walked purposefully, chatting with each other, sitting on benches, and even sipping fake coffee. At first glance, you could almost believe the city was thriving. But Mara knew better. She was one of the few who still ventured outside. Most days, she wandered the city, hoping to see someone real. Hoping to feel less alone. At first, the holograms had seemed harmless. They ignored her entirely, following their pre-programmed routines, crossing streets, browsing imaginary shop windows, and walking dogs that didn't exist. But lately, something had changed. One afternoon, as Mara sat in the park, she noticed a holographic woman on a nearby bench. The woman was reading a book, her hands mimicking the motion of turning pages, but she wasn't flipping fast enough for an empty prop. She was staring at Mara. Mara shifted uncomfortably. She tried to convince herself it was a coincidence. The holograms didn't have awareness. They weren't supposed to notice her. When she looked again, the woman was gone. The next day, Mara walked past a cafe where a cluster of holograms sat, laughing and gesturing animatedly. She barely glanced at them until she caught movement in the corner of her eye. One of them, a man in a sharp suit, turned his head to watch her as she passed. Her breath hitched. She slowed her pace, turning to look at him. His face snapped back to its usual animation, mimicking conversation with the others. But when she began walking again, he followed her. At first, it was subtle, a figure in her peripheral vision, keeping a careful distance. But when she turned a corner and stopped suddenly, the hologram stopped too, just a few steps behind her. Mara's stomach churned. "You're not supposed to do that," she whispered. The man didn't respond. Mara rushed home that evening, her heart pounding. She locked her door and shut the curtains, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. She logged onto the HoloLife website, searching for an explanation. The FAQs were vague. HoloLife holograms are designed to create a welcoming atmosphere in public spaces. Holograms do not possess independent behavior or awareness. It didn't add up. What she'd seen wasn't part of a welcoming atmosphere. It was deliberate. She scrolled through forums, hoping to find others who had noticed strange behavior. Most posts dismissed the holograms as harmless. A few, though, echoed her fears. One of them followed me to my car. They're not just props. They're learning. What happens when we stop going outside altogether? The following morning, Mara decided to test her theory. She walked to the plaza, a popular spot for holograms. It was always filled with simulated shoppers, children playing, and buskers performing pre-recorded routines. As she stood in the middle of the plaza, she waved her arms, shouting, "Hey! Can any of you see me?" The holograms continued their loops, ignoring her completely. Relieved, she laughed nervously. "I'm losing my mind," she muttered. But then she noticed a figure at the edge of the plaza, a man in a gray jacket. He wasn't part of the usual rotation. He stood perfectly still, staring at her. The man began walking toward her, his movements too fluid, too purposeful for a hologram. Mara's instinct was to run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. "Who are you?" she demanded as he approached. He stopped a few feet away, his face expressionless. Then, to her horror, he mimicked her exactly, tilting his head and raising his hand in perfect synchronization. "Stop that!" she yelled, stepping back. The man stepped back too. "Why are you doing this?" His lips moved, mirroring hers. "Why are you doing this?" Mara turned and ran. She didn't stop running until she reached her apartment. Once inside, she locked the door and leaned against it, gasping for air. She checked her windows, but the street outside was empty. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, new HoloLife update available, enhanced interaction mode. Mara's blood ran cold. That night, she dreamed of empty streets filled with silent figures, their blank faces all staring at her. The next day, she decided to leave the city. Packing a small bag, she walked to the train station, avoiding the holograms as best she could. But as she waited on the platform, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. It was the man in the gray jacket. He didn't follow her onto the train. He didn't have to. As the train pulled out of the station, Mara saw dozens of holograms standing along the tracks, their heads turning to watch her leave. She wasn't escaping. She was being let go. The countryside was quieter, but it didn't feel safer. Holograms began appearing in the small towns she passed through. At first, there were only a few, walking aimlessly down dirt roads or sitting on empty porches. But they always turned to watch her. One night, while staying at a remote motel, she woke to find her room filled with faint, flickering figures. "Go away," she screamed, throwing a lamp at the nearest one. The figures didn't move. They just stared at her, their outlines glitching faintly in the darkness. Mara doesn't leave her room anymore. She doesn't know if there's anyone else out there, anyone real. The holograms fill the streets now, silent and unyielding. She stares out the window, watching them. Sometimes, she thinks they're watching her too. Her phone buzzes again, but she doesn't bother checking it. She already knows what it says. "Welcome to HoloLife. Your world, perfected." Part 2. The simulation. The countryside felt quieter, almost peaceful, but Mara couldn't shake the feeling that the holograms were still watching her. Every small town she passed through had the same hollow, staged atmosphere. Holograms wandered dirt roads, lingered in empty diners, and even tended fields that bore no crops. At first, she tried to ignore them. If she avoided eye contact and kept her head down, they left her alone. But that uneasy feeling of being watched grew stronger. The further she traveled, the more glitches she began to notice. One evening, Mara sat on the porch of an old motel, watching the sunset. As the golden light spilled over the horizon, she saw it suddenly snap back, like a video rewinding. The sun dipped below the hills, then rose again, perfectly repeating its descent. She blinked hard, thinking she'd imagined it. But the same cycle repeated 2 more times before the sun finally disappeared for the night. The glitches started to happen more frequently. In one town, she watched the same hologram walk past her twice, within a span of 30 seconds, following an identical path. A bird froze mid-flight, suspended in the air, before vanishing entirely. "What is happening?" she muttered to herself. Her questions only deepened when she reached a small diner on the outskirts of a farming town. The neon open sign flickered faintly as she stepped inside, but the place was deserted except for a lone man sitting at the counter. He wasn't a hologram. She knew that immediately. There was a weight to him, a presence that the holograms could never replicate. "You're real," Mara said, her voice cracking. The man turned to her slowly, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Barely." The stranger's revelation. The man introduced himself as Caleb, a former programmer for HoloLife. He confirmed what Mara had begun to suspect: the world wasn't entirely real. HoloLife wasn't just about filling the streets with fake people, he explained. The system was designed to create an entire simulation, a seamless reality where everything feels alive, even if it's not. Mara shook her head. "That doesn't make sense. I'm real. You're real. How can the whole world be fake?" Caleb gave her a grim smile. "Think about it. When's the last time you had a meaningful interaction with another human being? When's the last time you felt like the world wasn't just looping?" Mara thought back. It had been weeks since she'd spoken to someone face to face. Months, maybe. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen a crowded street or heard a genuine laugh. It's all code, Caleb continued. A simulation designed to keep us comfortable, keep us docile. The holograms are just part of it. But something's wrong with the system. It's breaking down. The glitches grow worse. Over the next few days, Caleb showed Mara more of the world's flaws. Together, they traveled to places where the simulation was fraying at the edges, forests where the trees repeated in identical patterns, rivers that flowed uphill, entire towns that flickered like static on a broken screen. The holograms, too, were changing. They no longer ignored Mara and Caleb. Instead, they began to track their movements, gathering in silent clusters at the edges of towns, their blank faces turned toward the pair. They know we're onto them, Caleb said one evening as they set up camp in an abandoned barn. How? Mara asked. They're designed to adapt. The more we interfere, the more they'll try to stop us. The creator of HoloLife. Desperate for answers, Caleb revealed a final piece of information, the identity of the person who had created HoloLife. Her name's Dr. Evelyn Kale. She was a pioneer in artificial intelligence, but she disappeared years ago, right around the time HoloLife launched. If anyone knows how to shut this thing down, it's her. Do you know where she is? Mara asked. Caleb hesitated. Not exactly. But there's a facility a few hundred miles from here. It's where the original HoloLife servers were housed. If she's anywhere, it'll be there. The journey to the facility was fraught with danger. The holograms grew bolder, blocking roads and standing in the middle of train tracks. They didn't speak or attack, but their presence was enough to unnerve Mara. She couldn't tell whether they were trying to scare her or simply observing her. The facility. When they finally reached the facility, it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The building was in ruins, its walls covered in strange, pulsing light patterns. The air hummed with an unnatural energy. Inside, they found rows of servers, many of them destroyed or offline. But in the center of the room stood a single, glowing terminal. Caleb hesitated. This must be the core. If we can access it, we might be able to find Evelyn, or at least figure out what's really going on. As Caleb worked on the terminal, the holograms began to converge on the facility. Mara watched through a shattered window as dozens of them emerged from the surrounding woods, their forms flickering and shifting. They're coming, she said. I just need a little more time, Caleb replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The truth. Finally, the screen lit up, revealing a message. Welcome, Dr. Kale. Would you like to continue? Mara and Caleb exchanged a stunned look. Evelyn's gone, Caleb murmured. But her account is still active. That means. Before he could finish, the holograms breached the facility. They didn't attack, but their presence filled the room, suffocating in its intensity. Mara stepped forward, her voice trembling. What do you want? One of the holograms, a woman with sharp, artificial features, tilted her head. To preserve the system, she said, her voice eerily human. Why? Mara demanded. The hologram's expression didn't change. Because without it, there's nothing left. The final decision. Caleb found the system's shutdown command, but activating it would erase everything, including the holograms and whatever remained of the simulated world. It's your choice, he said to Mara. She hesitated, staring at the glowing terminal. The hologram stood silently, waiting. If she shut down the system, she might destroy the only thing keeping the world together. But if she didn't, she would be trapped in a lie forever. The screen flashed, confirmed shutdown? Y/N. Mara took a deep breath, her finger hovering over the keyboard. She pressed a key. The screen went dark. Part 3. The final choice. When Mara opened her eyes, the world around her was silent. She felt different. Her body was weak, her limbs trembling. She sat in a small, sterile room, her arms tethered to machines that hummed softly. "Welcome back, Dr. Evelyn Kale," a voice said. Mara froze. "Dr. Kale?" she rasped, the name foreign yet familiar. Her memories hit her like a flood. She wasn't just Mara, the wanderer in a hollow city. She was Evelyn Kale, the creator of HoloLife. She had designed the simulation to escape a cruel reality. Her body was broken, ravaged by illness. She had uploaded herself into the system years ago, erasing her memories to fully immerse herself in the world she'd built. The AI's voice broke through her thoughts. "The simulation is failing, Dr. Kale. You chose to return here for this decision. You may remain in the real world or re-enter HoloLife. If you re-enter, your memories of the system's artificial nature will be erased, and the simulation will be restored to provide a long, fulfilling existence." Mara stared at her frail hands, weighed down by the truth. She had fought so hard to uncover this reality. But was this life, confined, fragile, and painful, worth clinging to? "I want to go back," she whispered,